Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we actually have to talk about Afghanistan because obviously, if you've been watching the news, Afghanistan basically has fallen. In 10 days, the Taliban has taken it over. Now, I'm not going to sit here and adjudicate the politics of who did what. This is Biden's fault or Trump's fault or W's or Obama's. There have been 4 presidents that have been involved in Afghanistan. I want to talk to the Afghans themselves, the citizens of Afghanistan. And first, I'm going to start with an article from Reuters that I think really underscores just a very serious problem that we have. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, at some point, we're going to start seeing TikTok memes and YouTube videos and all of that from citizens of Afghanistan, basically making fun of the Taliban." Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case because when you run the government, you can run the internet, which means you can censor it, and the Taliban has basically a history of going after those that are dissenting against them, and we've seen that in basically the drive as they were taking over provincial capitals before they took over Kabul the other day. And so by virtue of that, there are a lot of Afghans that are very terrified of essentially having their information stolen, hit, or basically they could be arrested or worse by virtue of what their social media and history says. Now, I'm going to start, like I said, with this article from Reuters because I think it's a really good backdrop for this, and also explain some of the information that I'm about to talk about here, as I'm going to give some advice at the end of this. But let's start with them, because thousands of Afghans are struggling to ensure the physical safety of their families after the Taliban took control of the country. But now they've got an additional worry, which is the biometric databases and their own digital history that can be used to both track and target them. Now, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that basically he warned of chilling curbs on human rights and violations against women and girls, and Amnesty International on Monday said that thousands of Afghans, including academics, journalists, and activists, were at serious risk of Taliban reprisal. Now, after years there of a push to digitize databases in Afghanistan and introduce digital identity cards and biometrics for voting, activists warn obviously that these technologies could now be used against basically vulnerable groups, meaning you're not in the Taliban, therefore you could potentially be vulnerable. Now, Human Rights First is basically a human rights organization based out of the United States, wrote on Twitter today, today, and I quote, "We understand that the Taliban is now likely to have access to various biometric databases and equipment in Afghanistan. This technology is likely to include access to a database with fingerprints and iris scans and include facial recognition technology." Now, Human Rights First basically published a Farsi language version of their guide of how to delete your digital history they also produced for the activists in Hong Kong last year, and they also put together a manual on how to evade biometrics. And some of their tips I actually think are really good. I actually put them out myself as well. And basically, tips to bypass facial recognition include things like looking down, or wearing things that obscure your facial features, or applying many layers of heavy makeup to basically change the contours of your face. Now, although fingerprint and iris scans are difficult to bypass, that is something that I think we really need to talk about and we really need to discuss, because quite frankly, altering those things is very difficult. It's not actually, most biometric scanners aren't looking at your fingerprint, they're looking at the blood flow of your fingerprint, basically of your fingertips. So that is obviously a huge problem. Now, the chief technology officer at Human Rights First, Welton Chang, said, and I quote, "With the data, it is much more difficult to obfuscate you and your family's identities, and the data can also be used to flesh out your contacts and network. It could also be used to, quote, create a new class structure. Job applicants would have their bio data compared to the database, and jobs could be denied on the basis of having connections to the former government or security forces. Now, the most dire circumstance would be to use the data to target anyone who was involved in the previous government or worked in an international nonprofit." And basically, that's obviously a huge thing. And I had recently read a story about somebody getting wind of a translator that really desperately wanted to come to the United States, unfortunately captured, tortured, executed, as was his family, except for his 10-year-old daughter, which was turned over to the Taliban leadership. And I think we're going to see those stories coming out more and more, as the dust settles on this and as they take control. The Taliban just had their first press conference today, and so here we are. Now, Even 5 years ago, the Taliban was using the government biometric systems to target members of the security forces, checking their fingerprints against a database, and that's according to local media there. So this is not a new problem, but today, just after the militants rolled into the capital, Kabul, or I should say Monday for them, which was yesterday for us here in the United States, there were fears that this was already happening. Basically, Taliban started doing door-to-door search for government officials, basically, and that is according to Twitter, a Twitter user called Mustafa, basically adding that journalists' homes were also being searched as well. A Kabul resident said in a private message that she had heard of those house-to-house inspections and that the Islamist militants were using biometrics machines. So, the Taliban in a statement said that it, quote, assures all its citizens that it will, as always, protect their life, property, and honor, and create a peaceful and secure environment for its beloved nation. They seem to be breaking this as they were sweeping through provincial towns. We will see if they can actually be trusted. Quite frankly, I don't think they can be. And they've also come out and said that basically those laws fall under whatever their belief of Sharia law is, which is a strict Islamic code for living. And so by virtue of that, your rights are quite not going to be the same as it was under the previous government. But digital right groups are already getting significant number of requests from civil society groups and activists on basically how to secure their digital presence. So digital identity cards in Afghanistan called the Tazkira can expose certain ethnic groups, while even telecom companies, meaning your cellular phone provider, can basically have a wealth of data on you that can be used to track and target people. And now that the Taliban run the country, they have access to those kinds of things. Now, the responsibility to secure the data systems was that of the Afghan government, the previous government that fell in 10 days. And so it's really unlikely that they actually scrubbed or deleted any of this data, not just on the citizens, but also on the government employees as well. Meanwhile, Afghans were doing what they could to basically get rid of their digital profiles. Men, according to Reuters, boys and men were, quote, frantically going through phones to delete messages they have sent, music they have listened to, and pictures they have taken. And they were quoting BBC reporter Sana Safi talking on Twitter. So this is obviously a huge problem here. When you have the collapse of a government, especially one that's going to come in, forget religion for a second, simply as an authoritarian and basically say, you're either with us or against us. And if you're against us, we can start looking through that data to see what you've said about us. If you have, let's say, listened to music that is not considered kosher, pardon the Jewish pun there, in a Sharia society, this is a huge problem. And so I really urge anybody that's in Afghanistan, for your own safety and your security, make sure that you are deleting, all those posts on Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or whatever you're using. Make sure that you're then deleting your profiles in there as well. Hopefully the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world will basically see a call to action and say, you can delete this. We won't give this over to this government, and it won't be searched publicly. And so by simply deleting it, that would be safe. And I call on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and all of them to actually do something along those lines to make sure that people can quickly and safely, take care of that. I also recommend, if you have an iPhone or an Android, wiping it out completely, using the erase feature, because that will actually erase and overwrite the data, and then basically turning it back on with a brand new account, logging that in. And then by virtue of that, enabling encryption with a strong password, but don't use biometrics. Biometrics can either be spoofed, they can possibly be taken from you, they can be forced upon you, meaning they can force your hand onto your phone to unlock it, and therefore that would be a problem, or put it up to your face and unlock it as well. So this is a huge problem. Don't expect to have civil rights, in this era, as they are basically hunting down those that they believe stand in their way. And that's a terrifying prospect for anybody in that zone. I think the world's heart, goes out to you guys. I hope you are all safe. I hope you're able to make it, to let's say a safe country or safe harbor, or survive where you are. And I think we're all going to be bracing for an upcoming refugee crisis in the countries that surround you, like Iran, Tajikistan, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a huge, huge problem. But please make sure you're staying safe. Make sure you're staying as private as you can. And if you are going to basically create a dissident movement, make sure that you are coordinating using secure apps with end-to-end encryption, apps like Signal, or going to the dark web using a VPN that will obfuscate where you're coming from to make sure that you can coordinate, securely and ideally away from the prying eyes of your government. So that is my advice. That's about as much as I can do, at this point. And so good luck. That's all I really got to say. And this has been your news of the day.